lovely to be with you all on World Alzheimer's Day. I hadn't realised when Becky invited me, must have been months and months and months ago, it hadn't clicked what day it was. So I've given up the opportunity to be on BBC, on ITV, just to be here with you today. So excuse me for reading my words, but if I don't, I'll just start talking about anything and everything, and probably Bake Off or Strictly will come into the conversation. So on the 31st of July 2014, I was given the devastating diagnosis of young onset dementia. And at the time, I was living happily alone in York. I was 58 and otherwise healthy and working full-time in the NHS at St James Hospital in Leeds. I used to train sisters and matrons how to manage their staff and how to roster their staff. So you can imagine I was the most unpopular person on the planet when rosters were released. But I did love my job. And although it was truly shocking to hear such news, it was also, bizarrely, a relief. A diagnosis finally puts an end to all the uncertainties of what's happening to you. And when you're experiencing strange symptoms, your mind works overtime, drumming up possible causes. I have young onset dementia because dementia isn't age-related. People often just think, when they hear the word dementia, of the end stages. It's a common problem for those of us with young onset, and I've been questioned many times, even by professionals, about how can I possibly have dementia? Well, it has to have a beginning, and it has to have a middle. And everyone in the late stages had their own beginning and their own middle, which people so often forget. And I'm an example of someone 4 years in. Many people have asked me, what does it feel like? Well, every day is different for me. Most days are fair to middling. But on bad days, it's like a fog descends on the brain, and confusion reigns from the minute you wake up. And during these times of confusion, I have to work really hard at remembering the day of the week and what I'm supposed to be doing. One analogy I use, which may help, is that of driving. When you've passed your test, you drive automatically. Without thinking, you change gear, you turn right, you stop, you start, all without thinking. But when you're learning to drive, you have to take each manoeuvre step by step and think about what you're doing. And dementia has taken me back to being a learner driver. I have to consciously think of everything I'm doing, step by step. And we have a complex brain disease. Many people have said they're ashamed to admit they have dementia. But what is there to be ashamed of having a complex brain disease? Imagine the brain as a string of fairy lights, each fairy light representing a different function of the brain. Some lights flicker on and off. Dementia affecting our ability to do something one day, and then we're able to the next as the light comes on. But when the light fails altogether, that's when dementia has won and has taken that specific ability away from us for good. But different fairy lights flicker and fail for each of us. And that's why I can type and others can't. That's why they still cook and I can't. That's why they still feel hunger and I don't. We're all different. And of course, dementia isn't just about memory. Another misconception people often have. The first thing we usually notice is our memory, but so many of our other senses are affected as well. I had to move from what I thought was my forever home in York, as one of my first senses to be affected was my hearing. Certain tones of noise now physically hurt my ears. And emergency vehicles whizzing through the streets of York with their sirens blaring used to just overwhelm me. So remember that in your work settings, as a simple crash of a trolley or something metal against metal can physically hurt our ears. I also hadn't appreciated how hard it would be to get used to a new house in a new village and learn where I lived. I met my neighbours thinking their house was my house. You can imagine the shock on their faces when I was trying to let myself into their door. But once I explained, all my neighbours had been wonderful. I have a tiny kitchen, but when I moved in, it had 2 doors, which used to confuse the hell out of me because I couldn't remember where each door led. So I'd spend ages walking round and round in circles. But my solution was to get my screwdriver out and take the doors off. So now I can see exactly where the exits lead to. Doors are so often a problem for people with dementia because we simply can't remember what's at the other side. I also don't see kitchen cupboards and wardrobe doors. They just blend into the walls as though they don't exist. My daughters, when I first moved into the house, used to ask me why I was wearing the same clothes. And I said to them that I couldn't have unpacked all my clothes because I can't find them. But it was because I couldn't see the wardrobe doors. And so I forgot that they existed. Many people have said I should have see-through cupboards. But not only are these really expensive, they also look chaotic to look at the contents. Because you either have to keep them mega tidy, which was never going to happen, or you can see lots of stuff which simply looks chaotic. So my solution to that was to simply take a photograph of the contents of each cupboard and stick the photograph on the door. And it's actually the photograph that attracts my attention. I don't have to keep everything in exact order of the photograph. It's the photograph that attracts my attention to say, look in here, there's things in here. Simple yet effective solutions. Vision is also very commonly affected. Our eyes see, but our brain doesn't interpret correctly. And we're often sent to the opticians when it's not our eyes that are causing the problem, it's our brain interpreting what our eyes see. Going downstairs, if the edge isn't clearly marked, is really difficult. Going upstairs, I often find fine, but if you can manage to come downstairs, stairs often look like an escalator if they're not clearly marked with an edge. But I find that if someone walks in front of me and I hold onto their shoulder, I'm concentrating on them rather than the stairs below me. And of course, I'm sure you're all aware of black mats in doorways. Simply look like a black hole. So you can imagine that can be very disturbing for someone wanting to walk through and not understand that it's not a black hole that they're going to fall down. One of the new perceptions is the large TVs mounted on walls, and they're very thin these days. They used to be sort of that wide when I was younger, but now they're really, really thin. And they have the same effect as the mat on the floor when they're switched off. They look like a hole in the wall. I often have to take a second look at my screen to think, oh no, that's the TV screen. And Becky, quite wonderfully, must have read somewhere what I'd written. My B&B in that I always stay at in Keswick. I always stay there because the owner knows how to look after me. And she always puts me in the same room. And she's now read my book. And the last time I went, she'd put a red pillowcase over the screen, simply to change it from black to red. And Becky did exactly the same thing in my hotel room last night. So that was a very heartwarming find when I went into my hotel room. But unless people tell you this, no one knows. Hallucinations are also very common. I once thought my shed had disappeared in the back garden. I looked out of my window one day, and all I could see was the concrete base. Visions like this, as you can imagine, are very disturbing and very frightening. And I could have immediately rung the police and reported the crime. But instead, I've learnt to have a 30-minute rule. And if something seems strange and not right, I wait 30 minutes. And if it's still not right in 30 minutes, then I know it's probably true. But of course, 30 minutes later, my shed had appeared quite happily in my garden again. So I knew it was dementia playing tricks on my mind. My friend sees a man in her room, sometimes with just a leg hanging out of the drawer. Now imagine how frightening that can be. She asked me how on earth to cope one day. I simply tried to calm her by asking her if she'd given him a name. Has she tried to take a picture of him to see if it was real, because the camera never lies? She's now far more relaxed and simply tells him to go away, she's busy, because she's got that way now of dealing with those hallucinations. Or she simply slams the drawer shut. I wonder how many of you sleep on the same side of the bed. I know most people do. But when you're in hospital or moved into a care home, people are often helped into bed at whichever side is convenient for the room or for the nurse. But imagine how confusing that is for someone with dementia. You know how confusing it is for you if you have to sleep on the opposite side of the bed. Remember, little things like this can just confuse people and make them distressed. Try it yourself next time when you put on your own coat. Try putting in the opposite arm first, and you'll see how confusing it is, because we often put the same arm in first, even putting on a coat. And I'm not downplaying the enormous struggles we have, and enormous struggles we do have. But what I'm saying is there's often simple solutions that can just help make it calmer and easier to cope with. I've always said that it's an advantage that I live alone, which sounds bizarre probably. But living on your own means there's no one to move things around. Because if somebody moves things around, to me it no longer exists. Or it becomes confusing if I find it in a different place. So consistency and routine, so important. having said that, for couples, I think it's even harder. And for those working in care homes. It's hard not to disable someone before they've lost the capacity to do something. And for the kindest of reasons, we often do something for the person because it's quicker, because you think you're being kind. But if we don't do something day after day and repeat it, no matter how long it takes us, we simply forget. And as soon as you strip someone of their independence in whatever small way, you're also stripping them of their self-respect and the feeling of worth. Sarah and Gemma used to do loads of things for me in the beginning for the kindest of reasons. They'd help me on with my coat, for example. But I could still put on my own coat. If I'd suddenly stopped and allowed them to do it, within a few weeks, I'd have struggled to put on my own coat. And I told them that if they kept on doing it, they'd have to come to my house every single day when I wanted to go out. And they immediately stopped doing it. You're actually creating problems for yourself, and this applies in your situation as well. Sometimes it's a matter of just learning new ways to do something. I find slip-on shoes easier now. I get in a muddle with shoelaces. So having slip-on shoes means I can put on my own shoes still. And I've recently found my new best friends because I love walking in the Lake District. But I love to be like everyone else and have walking shoes on, which are always lace-ups. But of course I found the no-tie shoelaces now, which means I could just slip my walking boots on and away I go and look just like everyone else. There were men who wear ties. Many of my friends, they have ties already tied in their wardrobe, hanging up. And so in the morning, they simply put them over their head and they feel more in control and independent. The one phrase I always use is, there's always a way. Another change is that I now find using the phone so difficult, so I never answer it. I can't see the people, and more importantly, they can't see me thinking. So when there's a gap, when they ask a question because I'm thinking, they think I haven't heard and ask another one, which means I forget what they asked in the first place and we get in a right muddle. So I simply don't use the phone anymore. And I use FaceTime an awful lot for people if they will use it, because we can see each other. And you'll be amazed how many NHS services rely on you contacting them by phone to change an appointment, to book an appointment, which is ridiculous. I convinced Humber Hospital, Hull Hospital, to allow me to email them. And to begin with, it all went fine. They allowed me to send the first email, but then they send me an email back saying, can you ring this number? Oh. Language. Appropriate language. Something I rant on about frequently on my blog, on Twitter, and anywhere that will listen to me. When I was diagnosed, my neurologist, after having given me a diagnosis of young onset dementia, gave me a sad, pitying look, a handshake, and told me there was nothing more they could do, and said goodbye. I was discharged. No words of encouragement, no indication of how life will change, no positivity. The psychological effects of words should never be underestimated by any healthcare professional. The way they deliver a life-limiting diagnosis can make or break that person. If someone in such a high regard as a consultant or a doctor, people like yourselves, look at us with sadness and states that there's nothing that can be done, we have a tendency to believe them. We go away despondent and believing it to be the end. How different my consultation could have been if she had said, yes, the diagnosis is that of young onset dementia and not something anyone would wish to have. But think of it as the start of a different life, a way of adapting, of trying to outwit the challenges that dementia will inevitably try and throw at you. There is still so much you can do, albeit differently and with support. How different my mindset would have been coming out of that office with those different words ringing in my ears. We all know too well there is no cure for dementia. The medical model of diagnosis will focus on this fact. But how better for healthcare professionals to adopt a more social model of prescribing? They made the medical diagnosis through their skills and expertise, but now concentrate on the person and the life they still have to live. Being told you have dementia is bad enough. That's the devastating news. But that's where the negative language can stop and where more positive language can take over. Words that often spring to mind when you hear the word dementia are old age and suffering and senile. These are all negative words. And if society only hears negative words, the stigma will inevitably remain. Many people have asked why I get so incensed. And here's my explanation. As I've said, a diagnosis of dementia is bad enough. That's the devastating news. But if someone tells you day after day that you're suffering, you end up believing it. It has a negative impact on your well-being. And the same would happen to all of you if day after day you were told you were rubbish at your jobs. You'd end up thinking, there might be something in that. There's no doubt about it, we do suffer every day, we do struggle every day. But with help, we can find ways of overcoming these struggles and to make life easier. In nearly every scenario where the word sufferer is used, it can simply be replaced by living with. And I'm not minimising the considerable challenges we face. I'm simply saying, doesn't it sound so much better? It's no wonder there's still so much stigma surrounding dementia, and it's no wonder people feel, as many have told me, that dementia is a death sentence. The media are obviously one guilty party, but others surprisingly are clinicians. When we turn up, if we're lucky to have a memory clinic, which I don't, but if we're lucky to have one, we turn up and we do the ubiquitous Minimental test. Our score is reduced, surprise, surprise, or stays the same. Funny, we're never going to get any better, but there's always that surprise when it goes down or when it stays the same. But each time we have to go through that demoralising process. How much better it would be if we did the test, because I can see the advantages of doing the Minimental test, be given our score, but then advised on ways of coping and compensating for the parts of our brain that have let us down in that test. To be given coping strategies instead of negativity. It's not rocket science. Positive language and behaviour is returned with a positive feeling of well-being. And negative language and behaviour results in a decline, which will actually cost the NH more as we trundle to our GPs with depression. I'm a great believer in keeping my brain active through all the events and talks and research participation. And all of us who remain doing remain capable for longer. As soon as people stop doing, stretching themselves in a however little way, they decline far quicker. And I've seen it so often with so many of my friends. They thought, being advised, again, for the kindest of reasons, to take things easy and stop doing. Give yourself a rest. When in fact, the opposite has happened, and they've taken a sudden downturn and not been able to climb back up again. I thought I'd tell you now about the advantages of living with dementia. I can see you all thinking she's really lost the plot now. But I've had some amazing opportunities come my way that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't been diagnosed with dementia. I'm part of many research groups, committees, because that's how I believe I can change things. I talk all over the country in many different settings. This is the first time in a care home setting, which is wonderful for me. But don't get me wrong, attending all these events takes forever to organise so that I feel comfortable and relaxed. Yorkshire tea always goes a long way, as Becky's found out. But on a more light-hearted note, I was lucky enough to have a cup of tea with Julianne Moore at the premiere of Still Alice in London, which was a surreal experience. She actually won a BAFTA for her performance and mentioned me in her BAFTA speech, which was dumbstruck. I actually missed it, but I got so many messages from everyone else. I'm a consultant for the cast of the stage version, which just started their tour of Still Alice. And I've just met I meet the cast regularly and advise them. And the lead player, Sharon Small, I've been working with her as she's developed her role of Alice with her dementia. And if it comes to your area, it is in the West Country somewhere, but I can't remember where offhand. It's well worth seeing the stage performance. The film was excellent in its own way, but the stage version has been able to bring a different dimension to the storyline. And I persuaded them to add a few glimpses of humour, which the film was lacking. I promoted awareness of research in the House of Commons and have been on many radio and TV programmes and written many articles for magazines and newspapers. I've just had an article in the New York Times, of all places, none of which would have happened if I hadn't have been diagnosed with dementia. And I made a short film for the BBC on living with dementia, which has now been seen all over the world. And we made an updated version earlier this year for what had happened to the three of us 3 years on. A film I made for Woman and Home has had well over 10 million views, which is, again, is just phenomenal. But the greatest achievement so far has been the release of my book, Somebody I Used to Know, which again amazingly has become a Sunday Times bestseller, and which is on sale here today. It came out here in February, America and Australia in March, and has foreign releases in many countries imminent in translation. It's even been sold to be translated into Chinese, which again wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been diagnosed with dementia. I cope because I try and see the positives and grab opportunities that come my way. And all this goes to show that a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean the end. is simply the start of a different life. But we have to have positive support from those around us, including all you lovely healthcare professionals. And my book, Somebody I Used to Know, details all my thoughts and challenges of my life, both before and after dementia entered it. And many people assume it will be a depressing book, but I like to think it's filled with reality and humour. But even more than that, when I was given my diagnosis in 2014, I was determined to choose a better path, a positive one. I threw myself into dementia research and giving talks and keeping a blog that actually just served as my memory, called Which Me Am I Today, and is now read all over the world, which is very humbling. And although I didn't know it when I started it, it would later help me write my book. But by the very nature of my diagnosis, my book is about the loss of the old, but more importantly, the birth of the new me. But what I hope it shows more is how relationships change in a crisis, and how old friends may be lost, but certainly so many more new friends are made, and how adapting to this new world is the key to survival. And remember, dementia may be terminal, but then so is life. Why not make the most of each and every day and grab opportunities that come your way? And I always think if today is a bad day, tomorrow may be better. So I'm going to finish off by reading a short extract from my book, which I hope will show you the humour that can be associated with dementia. Billy the cat pads into the kitchen, performing a tiny dance in front of my feet before he finds the patch of sunshine on the kitchen tiles. He flops down onto it while I scratch the back of his ears, and he purrs his approval. I shake some biscuits into his bowl, and he gets up and crunches on them noisily. He's only allowed a few, as Gemma has put him on a diet. She's not sure why he's put on so much weight recently, and even the vet has commented on it. I make myself a cup of tea, and as the kettle boils, I feel Billy's tail curling around my legs. And I glance at his empty bowl. Oh, Billy, have I forgotten to feed you? He looks up with big, sad eyes, his purr audible over the boiling kettle that switches itself off as I shake a few more biscuits into his bowl. I know our routine after this, despite the fact that so many others desert my memory every single day. I sit and sip my tea, and he paces around looking for the piece of red string with slivers of gold, the one I used to decorate his Christmas gift. It's become his favourite toy. He disappears, and I find him on the stairs, sitting beside it, saying, "Here it is." We go up to the loft room. There's more space to play there, and I tie a knot in the end for him to catch in his claws, and our game continues until he loses interest. Afterwards, I sit in the chair, and Billy comes to sit beside me. And as we look out over the orchard, just to have him near makes me feel calm inside. He jumps up on my lap, and I run my fingers through his softer fur. I know I wouldn't have been able to do this before, but I've learned so much from animals. This change in my personality, this softening in one part of my brain, has meant that I've made time to sit and stop and watch, much like they do. Animals lead a simple life. They live in the moment, and that's what I found I have in common with Billy, the appreciation of now. Many fears have left me now, and perhaps it's because nothing can be more frightening than dementia. I live every day with the unknown, which is possibly why I'm no longer afraid anymore. I'm no longer afraid of cats, of the dark, of the disease. A few moments later, we hear the front door open, and both of us go downstairs to greet Gemma home from work. We meet her in the kitchen, flick on the kettle for a cup of tea, and while Billy sits on my lap, Gemma and I catch up on the day. 20 minutes must pass like that, and then Billy jumps down from my lap and sniffs at his empty bowl. Oh no, I must have forgotten to feed him. Gemma looks at him unsure. The vet says Billy has to lose weight, but he must be getting fed by someone else because his diet really isn't working. You are only giving him a few biscuits when you're on Billy duty, aren't you, Mum? Oh yes, I'm sure I do. As I shake more biscuits into his bowl.